Let me ask you something that might sting a little. When was the last time you felt truly alive? Not just awake, not just breathing, but genuinely excited about your day before your feet even hit the floor. If you had to pause and think about it, you're not alone. There's a quiet crisis happening in homes across this country, and it's not being talked about in doctors' offices or community centers. It's not arthritis or blood pressure, though those get plenty of attention. It's something far more insidious, because it happens so gradually that most people don't realize they're losing themselves until they've already disappeared. I'm talking about the slow fade, the gentle erosion of vitality that happens when we retire from our jobs and accidentally retire from life itself. Over the next 20 minutes, I'm going to share 10 daily patterns that are secretly dismantling your joy, your energy, and your sense of purpose. These aren't the obvious warnings about staying active or eating vegetables. These are the subtle, everyday choices that seem harmless, but are actually building invisible walls around your world. And here's what makes this urgent. Every single one of these patterns feels comfortable in the moment, which is exactly why they're so dangerous. Let's start with something that happens 3 times every single day, yet most people living alone have completely given up on it. I'm talking about meal times, but not in the way you think. This isn't about nutrition labels or portion sizes. This is about the quiet surrender that happens when you stop treating meals like events worth your attention. Here's what that looks like in real life. You're standing at the kitchen counter, eating cereal directly from the box because washing a bowl seems like too much effort just for yourself. Or you're microwaving the same frozen dinner you've had 4 nights this week, eating it while scrolling through your phone, not tasting a single bite. Maybe you've even progressed to what I call the bachelor special. Crackers with whatever spread requires the least cleanup, consumed while standing over the sink so there aren't even dishes to deal with. Now you might be thinking this is just practical efficiency. Why make a production out of something when there's no audience? But that's where the trap lies. You are the audience. You are the person who deserves the ceremony. When you eliminate the ritual from eating, you're sending yourself a devastating message that you're not worth the effort anymore. And your subconscious believes you. Think about what a meal used to mean in your life. It was when families gathered, when conversations happened, when you paused from the rush of the day to actually be present. Even simple weeknight dinners had a rhythm, a place setting, a moment of transition between work and rest. Somewhere along the way, living alone convinced you that these things only mattered when performed for others. That's the lie you need to stop believing today. Here's what I want you to understand. The act of setting a proper place for yourself, even if it's just a placemat and a cloth napkin, is a radical declaration of self-worth. Lighting a candle for a Tuesday night dinner alone is revolutionary because it says your ordinary moments deserve beauty. Playing music while you cook, arranging food on the plate instead of eating from the container, sitting at an actual table instead of the couch. These aren't silly affectations. They're the difference between existing and living. I know a woman who started what she calls her sacred suppers. Same simple food she was eating before, nothing fancy, but she uses her good china that had been sitting in the cabinet for years. She pours water into a wine glass. She puts her phone in another room. She says the first week felt absurd, like playing house for an audience of 1. By the second week, she realized she was enjoying the food more. By the third week, she noticed she was sitting up straighter, thinking clearer, feeling more human. The food didn't change. The ceremony changed everything.
Now, let's talk about the constant companion that millions of people living alone rely on to fill the silence. I'm talking about your television, but more specifically, I'm talking about the way it's become a permanent roommate that never leaves. Before you get defensive, I'm not saying television is evil or that you need to throw yours away. I'm saying there's a critical difference between watching television and letting television watch over your entire life. Here's the pattern I see everywhere. The TV goes on first thing in the morning, supposedly for the news, but it stays on through breakfast, through the crossword puzzle, through the afternoon. It's playing during dinner even though you're not watching. It's background noise while you fold laundry, pay bills, or drift off to sleep. If you added up the hours, you'd discover the television is on more than it's off, and somewhere in that calculation, something heartbreaking has happened. You've outsourced the job of making your home feel occupied. The insidious thing about this habit is that it mimics companionship without providing any of the actual benefits. Real companionship challenges you, asks questions, notices when you seem off, remembers what you said last week. The television just broadcasts. It fills the air with voices and movement so you don't have to confront the fact that you're alone, but it never actually makes you less lonely. In fact, it can make loneliness worse by preventing you from developing the capacity to be peacefully alone with yourself. I went through a phase where I couldn't handle silence. Every quiet moment felt like it was screaming at me about everything I'd lost, everyone who was gone. So I kept the TV running like a security blanket. It took my daughter visiting and gently pointing out that she'd tried to have 3 conversations with me and I hadn't heard any of them because I was half listening to a show I'd already seen for me to realize what I'd done. I'd traded presence for noise. Here's what changed things for me. I started treating television like the event it used to be before we had hundreds of channels. I choose 1 or 2 programs I genuinely care about each day. I watch them with intention, actually paying attention, maybe even discussing them with friends afterward, and then I turn it off. What fills the space instead? At first, nothing, and that nothing felt enormous and uncomfortable. But gradually, that nothing filled with reading, with music I actually listened to, with thoughts I could actually hear, with phone calls to people I'd been meaning to reach. The silence in your home isn't the enemy. The silence is where you find yourself again. It's where creativity lives, where memory processes, where peace actually happens. But you'll never discover that if there's always a narrator drowning it out.
There's a threshold in every home that holds more power than people realize. And I'm talking literally about your front door. Not metaphorically, though that applies too. I'm talking about the actual door that separates your private world from everything else. For people living alone, especially as the years accumulate, that door can transform from an entrance into a barrier without you noticing the change. It starts innocently enough. Maybe it's winter and going outside means bundling up, which feels like too much trouble for no particular reason. Maybe your knee is bothering you and the front steps seem more daunting than they used to. Maybe everything you need gets delivered now. Groceries, medication, even restaurant food, so there's genuinely less reason to leave. Day by day, week by week, the door opens less frequently. And every time it stays closed, the world outside becomes a little more foreign, a little more intimidating. I watched this happen to someone I care about. Capable, intelligent, fully mobile, yet somehow months would pass where she never stepped outside her home. Not because she couldn't, but because the habit of staying in had calcified into her routine. The outside world became this abstract concept, something that happened to other people. She'd look out the window like watching a nature documentary, observing life but not participating in it. Here's what that does to a person over time. Your world contracts, not just physically, though that's obvious, but psychologically and emotionally. The concerns of your daily life become microscopic because your daily life is microscopic. The pattern on the wallpaper becomes fascinating because you've stared at it so long. You know every creak in the floorboards, every stain on the ceiling, every quirk of light at different times of day. Your home becomes the entire universe, and like any universe that stops expanding, it eventually starts collapsing in on itself. But here's the beautiful thing about a door. It works both ways. It closes, yes, but it also opens. And opening it, even without going anywhere, is a powerful act of reconnection. I started a practice that's changed everything. Every single morning, I open my front door. Some days I step out, feel the weather, wave at a neighbor. Some days I just stand in the doorway for 60 seconds, letting fresh air move through, watching the world be the world. Some days I sit on my front step with coffee and let the neighborhood wake up around me. This simple act does something profound. It reminds me that I'm not separate from the world. It breaks the seal of isolation that forms when you're alone too long. It creates a literal and psychological opening. Neighbors start to recognize you again. The mail carrier might chat. Kids playing remember there's a person in that house. And you remember that life is still happening, still available, still yours to join whenever you're ready. The door isn't a wall, it's an invitation, every single day, to remain part of the living, breathing world. Don't let it become something you avoid.
Now, we need to talk about two words that have probably crossed your lips more times than you can count. Two words that masquerade as simple truth, but are actually a slow-acting poison. I'm too old. Think about how casually we deploy this phrase. Someone suggests trying a new restaurant with unusual food. I'm too old for that. A friend mentions a class at the community center. I'm too old to learn that. Your grandkid wants to show you a video game. I'm too old for those things. Each time you say it, you're drawing the boundaries of your life a little tighter. Here's what's actually happening when you say you're too old. You're not making a factual statement about your capabilities. You're making a preemptive decision to protect yourself from discomfort. Because trying new things is uncomfortable at any age. It means being a beginner again, which means being temporarily incompetent, which means risking looking foolish. When you're younger, society expects you to be learning, so there's less shame in being bad at something. But when you're older, there's this crushing assumption that you should already know everything you're going to know, that the learning years are behind you. That assumption is garbage, and every person who's thriving in their later years knows it. I think about the people I've met who refuse to accept that narrative. The 73-year-old woman taking her first art class, creating paintings that surprised even her with their emotion and color. The 81-year-old man learning to use a smartphone, not because he had to, but because he wanted to video chat with his great-grandchildren and see their faces light up when they talked. The 67-year-old joining a hiking group, going at her own pace, discovering trails she'd driven past for decades. These people aren't exceptional physical specimens. They're ordinary folks who decided that being old didn't mean being done. They recognized I'm too old actually means I'm scared, and they chose courage anyway. Because here's the truth. Failure at something new is infinitely better than success at doing nothing. When you try and stumble, you're at least moving. You're generating stories, building resilience, proving to yourself that you're still capable of growth. When you say you're too old and retreat to what's familiar, you're dying by degrees, and you're doing it voluntarily. I want you to think about one thing you've dismissed as being too old for. Just one. Maybe it's dancing, or learning an instrument, or traveling somewhere unfamiliar, or trying a new sport, or taking a class in something that's always interested you. Now ask yourself honestly, is it really your age that's stopping you, or is it fear wearing your age as a disguise? Because your body might have limitations, absolutely, but your capacity for new experience, for joy, for surprise, that doesn't have an expiration date. The next time you catch yourself saying, I'm too old, I want you to pause and rephrase. Try saying instead, that makes me nervous, or I'm not sure I'd be good at that, or that would push me out of my comfort zone. Because those statements are honest and addressable. Age is just the excuse. Fear is the real obstacle. And fear only wins if you let it speak for you.
Let me paint a picture that might feel uncomfortably familiar. You wake up in your bedroom. You shuffle to the bathroom, come back, climb into bed with your coffee. You've got your book there, your remote, your phone charger, maybe some snacks. The bedroom has everything you need within arm's reach. Hours pass. Maybe you eventually migrate to the kitchen for lunch, but then it's back to the bedroom. The rest of your home, the living room, the dining room, any other spaces, they sit empty.
collecting dust, serving no purpose. You're living in 300 square feet of a much larger home, and you don't even notice you've abandoned the rest. This is one of the most common and most damaging patterns of living alone in later years. It's what I call the geography of isolation. Your physical world contracts to whatever space requires the least movement, usually the bedroom, and slowly but surely your mental and emotional world contracts with it. It makes perfect sense logically. Why maintain multiple rooms when one has everything? Why make the bed if you're just getting back in it? Why sit in the living room when the TV and the comfortable chair are 10 feet away? But here's what you lose in that efficiency. You lose the psychological benefit of different spaces serving different purposes. Bedrooms are meant for sleep and intimacy. Living rooms are for gathering and activity. Dining rooms are for meals and conversation. Kitchens are for creation and nourishment. When all of those functions collapse into one room, you lose the mental architecture that gives your day structure and meaning. I fell into this trap hard after I retired. I convinced myself I was being practical. Why heat the whole house when I'm only using one room? Why clean spaces I don't need? Slowly, my bedroom became my office, my dining room, my entertainment center, my everything. And slowly, my energy drained away. I couldn't figure out why I felt so lethargic, so unmotivated. I was getting enough sleep, eating okay, but something essential was missing. What changed everything was a conversation with my doctor who asked me a simple question. How many rooms in your home did you spend time in yesterday? I realized the answer was one. She told me something I've never forgotten. Your environment shapes your energy. When you live in one room, your life becomes one-dimensional. So I made a deliberate choice to reclaim my home. I started having coffee in the kitchen every morning, standing at the counter or sitting at the table, not bringing it back to bed. I moved my reading chair to the living room and made it a rule that books get read there, not in bed. I cleared off the dining table and ate every meal there, even if it was just a sandwich. I started folding laundry in the spare bedroom with the radio on, making it an activity instead of a chore to rush through. Room by room, I moved back into my own home. And here's what happened. My energy came back. Not dramatically at first, but noticeably. Moving between rooms meant moving my body more. Different spaces triggered different mental states. The kitchen became associated with starting the day, the living room with relaxation, the dining table with nourishment and gratitude. My bedroom went back to being for sleep, which improved my sleep quality significantly. I wasn't living in a cave anymore. I was living in a home. Your home is a resource. It's space, possibility, variety. Don't let it become a warehouse where you're storing yourself in the smallest available unit.
Here's something that surprises people when I say it. Routine isn't the enemy of a vibrant life. In fact, routine is usually what makes a vibrant life possible. Now, I know that goes against everything we hear about spontaneity and adventure and keeping things fresh. But here's what I've learned after decades of watching people thrive or languish in retirement. The people who are happiest, most engaged, most alive, they almost always have solid routines underneath their flexibility. Think about it this way. Routine is like the foundation of a house. Nobody looks at a foundation and says, "Wow, how exciting!" But without it, nothing else stands. When you live alone, you don't have external structure. There's no job requiring you to be somewhere at a specific time. There's no family member's schedule organizing your day. It's all on you. And that freedom, which sounds wonderful in theory, can become paralyzing in practice. Days blur together. You can't remember if you showered today or yesterday. You lose track of whether you've eaten enough or slept too much. Time becomes this soup you're floating in, rather than a framework you're navigating. Here's where the magic of routine comes in. It's not about restriction. It's about creating reliable touch points that anchor your day and give it shape.
I learned this from someone who'd been living alone for over 20 years and seemed genuinely happy. Every morning, same time, he made coffee and sat by the window for exactly 10 minutes watching birds. That was his non-negotiable ritual. Everything else in his day could vary, but that 10 minutes was sacred. When I asked why something so simple mattered so much, he said something profound. In a life where almost nothing is required of you, you have to create your own requirements. Those 10 minutes reminded him that he was still operating in the world of time and intention. They gave him a starting point every day. They connected him to nature, to consistency, to something outside himself. And they were his choice, which made them powerful rather than restrictive. I started building my own routines with that wisdom in mind, not rigid schedules that controlled every hour, but reliable rhythms that gave my days architecture. I wake up at roughly the same time, I make the bed, which sounds trivial but psychologically signals that the night is over and the day has begun. I have coffee while looking outside, no phone, just observing. I take a walk before lunch, even if it's just around the block. I read for 30 minutes after dinner. Nothing revolutionary, but these touch points create structure. And here's the beautiful part. Within that structure, there's enormous freedom. I can be spontaneous about what I do between the touch points. I can change my lunch plans, work on different projects, visit friends, try new things. But I always know what the framework is. The routine doesn't trap me. It holds me steady so I can reach further without losing my balance. If you're living without any routine, your days can start feeling like they're happening to you rather than being created by you. But when you establish even a few simple, consistent practices, you're declaring that you're still in charge, still intentional, still living by design rather than default.
Now, I want to talk about something that might seem superficial, but carries profound weight. I'm talking about how you present yourself, how you appear when you look in the mirror, and whether you even look in the mirror anymore with real attention. This isn't about vanity. This is about dignity, and there's a world of difference between the two. Here's a pattern I've seen too many times. Someone retires, starts living alone, and slowly stops maintaining the small rituals of self-presentation. They wear the same comfortable clothes day after day. They skip shaving or doing their hair because, well, who's going to see them? They stop wearing jewelry or accessories that used to make them feel good. Makeup, if they wore it, gets abandoned. The mirror becomes just a quick functional check rather than a moment of actually seeing yourself. What's happening in these moments? You're unconsciously communicating to yourself that you don't matter anymore, that the effort of presentation is only worthwhile if there's an audience, and since you're alone, there's no audience, therefore no point. But you are the audience. You're the person who has to live with you every single moment of every single day. Don't you deserve to like what you see? I knew someone who described the turning point in his own decline. He said it was the day he realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd really looked at himself, not just glanced while brushing teeth, but actually looked with attention and recognition. He'd stopped shaving regularly. He wore whatever was clean enough. His hair was permanently disheveled. And he said looking in that mirror and seeing someone who'd given up, it shocked him into realizing he'd been disappearing without noticing. The act of grooming yourself, dressing with intention, maintaining your appearance, these aren't shallow concerns. They're acts of self-respect. They're ways of saying that you still value yourself enough to make an effort. It doesn't mean you need to dress formally every day or spend hours on appearance. It means you're intentional about how you show up for yourself. I started small. I decided that even if I had zero plans to leave the house, I would get fully dressed every morning. Not pajamas or sweatpants, actual clothes I'd wear out in the world. I shaved regularly. I combed my hair. If I wore accessories before, I wore them now. These small acts changed something fundamental. When I looked in the mirror, I saw someone who was still participating in life, not someone who'd checked out.
Your reflection is a daily conversation with yourself about your worth. What is that conversation saying? Are you telling yourself you're still valuable, still deserving of care and attention? Or are you signaling that you've given up, that maintenance no longer matters? The mirror doesn't lie, but it only reflects what you show it.
Let's talk about something that happens so gradually you don't notice until it's nearly complete. I'm talking about becoming invisible in your own neighborhood, your own community, your own corner of the world. It's entirely possible to live somewhere for decades and slowly fade from view until you're essentially a ghost, present but unseen, existing but not engaged. This happens most often to people living alone because there's no one else creating connections on your behalf. When you have a partner or family, they create social touchpoints automatically. Your spouse chats with neighbors, your kids connect you to other families, your household has a presence by default. But when you're alone, especially as you age, you can go days or weeks without meaningful interaction, and your community stops registering that you exist. I've seen both sides of this. I've been the neighbor who didn't realize someone had been struggling alone for months because they'd become so invisible, and I've been the person who almost disappeared myself, assuming nobody wanted to be bothered with an old guy who had nothing exciting to contribute. Both positions are tragic because they're based on mutual misunderstanding. The person living alone thinks they're being considerate by not imposing themselves on busy neighbors. The neighbors think they're being respectful by not intruding on someone's privacy. And in that mutual consideration, human connection dies. Nobody waves because nobody's outside. Nobody chats because nobody initiates. Nobody checks in because everyone assumes someone else is doing it. And before long, you have someone living in complete isolation, surrounded by people. Here's what broke that pattern for me. It was embarrassingly simple. I started waving. That's it. I made it a point to be outside my house at roughly the same time each day, usually early morning, and I waved at anyone who passed. Runners, dog walkers, people heading to work, kids going to school, just a wave and a smile. No grand conversation required. At first, people seemed startled. Some waved hesitantly, some ignored me, probably thinking I was confused. But I kept doing it, and gradually those waves turned into nods of recognition, then brief hellos, then short conversations about the weather, then real exchanges about life. Suddenly, I wasn't invisible anymore. I was that friendly guy on the corner who's always outside in the morning. People knew me. I knew them. I was visible again. Being visible doesn't mean you have to be the social butterfly of the neighborhood or host constant gatherings. It just means you exist in shared spaces often enough that people register your presence. It means you acknowledge others and allow yourself to be acknowledged. It means you're part of the fabric of the place, rather than a thread that's come loose. Your neighborhood needs its elders, its long-term residents, its institutional memory. You have value to that community, not just in what you provide, but in your simple presence. Don't let yourself fade away. Stay visible, stay engaged, stay connected to your corner of the world. Because when you're invisible, you're not just alone, you're forgotten. And that's a special kind of painful.
There's a delicate balance that everyone living alone has to navigate, especially as the years pass and losses accumulate. I'm talking about the relationship with memory, with the past, with all the physical reminders of lives lived and people loved. Your home can become a museum of yesterday, and while honoring memory is beautiful, being trapped in it is devastating. Walk into some homes and you immediately feel the weight of time frozen, every surface covered with photographs, rooms preserved exactly as they were when someone was still alive, closets full of clothes belonging to people long gone, drawers stuffed with letters and cards and mementos that haven't been touched in decades. It's not that these items aren't precious, it's that they've become barriers to forward movement, to new experiences, to the possibility that life still has chapters to write. I understand the impulse deeply. After loss, those physical objects become almost sacred. They're proof that love existed, that people mattered, that your life meant something. Letting go of them feels like betraying memory, like you're saying those people or those times didn't matter. But here's the painful truth.
Holding on to every physical reminder doesn't preserve memory. It can actually trap you in grief and prevent you from honoring the fullness of your life, past and present. I watched someone I care about live in what was essentially a shrine. Her late husband's office remained untouched for years, down to the half-filled coffee cup on the desk. His clothes still hung in the closet. His tools still filled the garage. She said she felt his presence in those things, and maybe she did, but she also felt paralyzed. She couldn't imagine changing anything, which meant she couldn't imagine moving forward with her own life. The shift came when her daughter asked a simple question: what would Dad want for this space? And that reframed everything. He wouldn't want a museum, he'd want life. He'd want creation and use and forward motion. So together, they thoughtfully went through things. They kept what genuinely mattered, items with specific memories attached, pieces that brought joy rather than just sadness, and they released the rest, donating, sharing with family, clearing space. In that cleared space, she created something new, an art studio, something she'd always wanted but never made room for. She kept his photograph there, kept a few of his tools that she used in her own projects, kept the essence of memory while making room for possibility. The past was honored, not erased, but it was no longer the only thing defining her home or her life. This isn't about cold pragmatism or rushing through grief. It's about recognizing when memory becomes a cage. Your past deserves to be treasured, but not to the exclusion of your present and future. The people you've loved would want you to keep living, keep growing, keep finding joy. They wouldn't want you frozen in amber, unable to move because you're surrounded by ghosts.
We need to talk about the most dangerous myth of aging, the one that whispers in quiet moments and saps more vitality than any physical ailment. It's the myth that you're done learning, done growing, done contributing, done becoming. That from here on out, it's just maintenance, just managing decline, just waiting. If you've ever felt this way, even for a moment, I need you to hear this clearly. That myth is a lie, and believing it will kill your spirit faster than anything else. I've met people in their 80s who are more alive, more curious, more engaged than people in their 40s. The difference isn't physical health, though that helps. The difference is mindset. The ones who are thriving have rejected the narrative that growth has an age limit. They've recognized that being older means having more experience to draw from, more wisdom to apply, more freedom to try things without worrying about conventional expectations. Think about what becomes possible when you're older. You're free from the pressure to impress anyone. You don't need to follow traditional paths or meet anyone's expectations but your own. You've survived enough to know that failure isn't fatal and that embarrassment is temporary. You have the perspective to know what actually matters and the courage to ignore what doesn't. These aren't limitations, these are superpowers. I know someone who started learning piano at 76, not because she dreamed of concert halls or had any particular musical background. She just liked how it sounded and wanted to see if she could do it. Her progress was slow. Her arthritic fingers didn't move the way younger fingers would, but every week she got a little better. And every week she felt a little more alive. She said learning something new kept her brain sharp and her days interesting. It gave her something to look forward to, something to struggle with in a good way, something that proved she wasn't done yet. Growth doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't mean you need to write a novel or climb a mountain, though if you want to do those things, who says you can't? Growth can be small and personal. It can be learning to use technology that connects you to family. It can be trying a recipe from a culture you've never explored. It can be picking up a hobby you abandoned decades ago or starting something you've always been curious about. The moment you tell yourself there's nothing left to learn or try is the moment you begin the real decline, not physical, but spiritual and mental. Your brain thrives on novelty and challenge. Your spirit thrives on purpose and forward motion. Your sense of self thrives on the evidence that you're still capable of surprising yourself. Every time you try something new, you're telling yourself a story about who you are, and that story is,
I'm still here, still growing, still in the game.
So, here we are. 10 patterns that seem harmless, but are slowly stealing the richness from your days. Turning meals into chores instead of ceremonies. Letting television replace real engagement. Allowing your front door to become a wall. Believing you're too old to try new things. Shrinking your world to a single room. Abandoning the structure of routine. Neglecting your appearance and dignity. Becoming invisible in your community. Turning your home into a museum of the past, and accepting the myth that growth is behind you. Every single one of these patterns offers comfort in the moment. That's why they're so seductive. It's easier to eat standing up than to set a table. It's easier to leave the TV on than to face silence. It's easier to stay inside than to engage with the world. It's easier to say you're too old than to risk looking foolish. It's easier to retreat to one room than to maintain a whole home. It's easier to drift without routine than to create structure. It's easier to stop caring about appearance than to make daily effort. It's easier to fade into the background than to stay visible. It's easier to live in memory than to create new ones. It's easier to believe you're done than to keep growing. But easy isn't the same as good. Easy is the slow fade. Easy is waking up one day and realizing you can't remember the last time you felt genuinely alive. Easy is looking back with regret rather than forward with possibility. The beautiful thing is that none of these patterns are permanent. You can decide today, right now, to make one small change. Set a proper place for your next meal. Turn off the TV for 1 hour and notice the silence. Open your front door and stand in it for 60 seconds. Say yes to something that scares you a little. Walk into a room in your home you've been avoiding. Create one simple daily ritual. Look in the mirror with real attention. Wave at a neighbor. Release one item you've been holding on to. Learn one new thing. You don't have to fix everything at once. You just have to prove to yourself that you're still capable of change, still deserving of effort, still fully alive. Because you are. No matter how many years you've accumulated, no matter how much you've lost, no matter how small your world has become, you have today. And today is always enough to begin again. Your golden years aren't behind you. They're right here, waiting for you to claim them. Don't let another day slip away to these quiet thefts of joy. You've earned a life that's full, connected, purposeful, and vibrant. Go live it.